Now to make our cranberry mead, we will be using the following. We need 2 bags, or 24 ounces, or 680 grams of fresh cranberries. We need 3 pounds, or 32 ounces, or 908 grams of pure raw clover honey. We'll need the juice of a quarter of a lemon, which is going to act as our acid blend substitute. Reason being, they sell lemons at the grocery store. They don't sell acid blend there, so we're going to be using this instead. We'll need 1 black tea bag. Tea bag is going to be acting as our tannin substitute, which is going to provide a little bit of astringency on the back end. Now, of course, if we had tannin powder, we'd be using that instead, but because we're trying to keep it as natural as possible and they don't sell tannin powder at the grocery store, we'll be using the tea bag method. We'll need about a half a cup, or about 125 milliliters of raisins. Normally I would say a good handful size of raisins, but since I've got big hands, I can't do that. So we'll keep it kind of measured this time. This time around, I'm going to be using a Red Star Premier Classic wine yeast because of its approximately 13% ABV. And of course, if you don't have wine yeast, you can still use this. This will work. We're going to need this anyway because we are going to be using a homemade yeast nutrient, and of course we'll be using bread yeast in order to create that homemade yeast nutrient. So we'll need about a quarter of a teaspoon of bread yeast. We'll need a couple of straining bags, optional of course, but I find using straining bags will make the process a little bit easier. We'll need 1 gallon, or 4 liters for you non-imperial folk, of clean filtered water. We need a carboy, jug, demijohn, take your pick, with a wide mouth opening so that we can get our straining bags into it. And also I should point out that this particular carboy does have its own built-in airlock. Now we'll need a second carboy because after about a week of primary fermentation, we want to transfer our wine to be, our musk, from our primary into our secondary carboy for the long-haul secondary process. We'll be racking it from here into another carboy in about 6 to 8 weeks or so, and then we'll continue to do that process until the wine is clear. Now with this, you will also need an airlock with a bung that will actually fit into the opening of the carboy. We'll need a fairly large pot, big enough to hold at least 1 gallon or 4 liters of water, plus our cranberries, plus our honey. So a good 8-cup pot should do it. It will be helpful, although not a necessity, to have a hydrometer with testing tube to help us determine what our starting gravity, or how much sugar we're starting out with in our mead, and our ending gravity, which is how much sugar is left after fermentation has been completed. There's a formula that we can use to then help us to determine what our alcoholic content, or our alcohol by volume, ABV, is going to be. And as I always say, last but certainly not least, is our food-grade sanitizer. Whether it's One Step, Star San, or whatever you happen to be using, we want to make sure that all of our equipment has been properly cleaned and sanitized before we start the winemaking process. If anything is going to go wrong, it'll probably go wrong because your equipment wasn't properly sanitized. And that, of course, is what we're going to be using to make this mead. Now, with, in my opinion, any fresh fruit, one of the first things that we really want to do is that we want to give our berries just a good rinse, just in case there's anything clinging onto it that need not be there. While you're in the process of doing your rinsing, if you run across any suspect berries that are either, well, let's just say either too soft or showing signs of, well, let's just say being past their prime, you might want to go ahead and pull those out. And let's start with berries that are, let's just say, viable. Now, there are a couple of ways we can chop these berries up. We can either do it this way, or we can do it this way. I mean, take your pick. Either way is going to work. This will just work a little bit better, a little bit faster. Be very careful using very sharp knives. And they will tend to roll around a bit. So I'm going to work on these and get these into a straining bag and then move on to the next step. Now with our cranberries being chopped up, I'm not going to mention which way I decided to go with chopping them up. However, it's now time again to get them into the straining bags. Now, if you don't have straining bags, I mean, you really don't need it. It's just that it makes cleaning up a little bit more easy. Now, since we have the straining bags open, with the raisins, we can do one of two things. We can either give the raisins a rough chop, or we can just go ahead and add them in. The raisins, of course, are just giving it a little added flavor and a little extra body. So depending on how much of that flavor and body you want to add into your mix, you can decide which way you want to incorporate them into the straining bags. Go ahead and tie this off, as with the other one. And on to the next step. Okay, now that we're over the stove, we want to take a little bit of our water and pour that into a small pan. And take the remaining amount of water, pour that into the large pot. Take our tea bag, drop that into the small pot, and we are going to take a quarter of a teaspoon of our bread yeast. That's a quarter of a teaspoon. Read that. And add that to our pot as well. Small pot. Remember, we need the bread yeast to be actually dead for it to be of any beneficial use as a yeast nutrient. And we'll put that on slow simmer. And we turn the heat on to our big pot. And let's bring that up to a boil. Okay, now that our water has come to a good rolling boil, we can go ahead and do a couple of things. One, we can drop in our cranberries and raisins. And two, we can add in our tannin/yeast nutrient mixture. Turn the stove off on the little pot. Turn the stove off on the big pot. And then put our cover on. Now, the reason why we're putting this in boiling water principally is to kill off any wild yeast that might still be clinging on to the cranberries. If you can kill off a few stray bacteria, that's fine as well, but mostly it's just to kill off the yeast. If we were using a sulfite solution like Canva tablets, then we wouldn't need to do the boiling aspect at all. We would just simply move on to the next step. So we're going to let this come down to room temperature. Well, we're going to let it come down to where it's fairly warm, and then we're going to go ahead and add in our honey. Okay, I've taken the opportunity to warm up some of our honey, and while our mixture is still fairly warm, I'm going to go ahead and incorporate our honey. And although I'm not going to do it on camera, I am going to rinse this out and make sure I get all of that honey goodness out of both of these containers. But in the interest of time, I'm going to take my freshly sanitized spoon and go ahead and incorporate that into the mix. And while I'm at it, you can mash down on some of the bags. Make sure all of that gets in there. Put our lid back on and wait for that to come down to room temperature. And it looks like that initial hydrometer reading is coming in at 1.080. All right, let's go ahead and transfer everything from the pot to our fermenter. Hands have been cleaned and actually sanitized. So we're going to go ahead and start with our straining bags, letting as much of it drain off as possible. So one. That's two. That was the easy part. Let's see if I can do this without spilling it all over the place. Well, I've had better efforts, but that will do. For the moment, let's go ahead and put our cap back on. Rinse off the fermenter and get this out of the sink. We now want to go ahead and get our lemon wedge ready. Seeds. And that ought to do it. And let's go ahead and strain this into our fermenter. We want to strain out as many seeds as possible. And all we really need is just a squeeze, a good squeeze. I mean, you don't need to scrape off every little bit of juice you got, but that's all you really need to do. Put the cap back on and move on to the next step. Okay, it is now time to start the process of turning our juice into wine. And in order to do that, we need yeast. Again, this is 1/4 teaspoon of our wine yeast. Again, if you don't have wine yeast, bread yeast will work. And let's kind of spread that around without just dumping it in there in one spot. I find this method has worked for all the brews. Let's just say 80% of the brews in which I've done it this way. But if you want to bloom your yeast before adding it in, please feel free. But again, this method has generally worked, so I generally stay with it. Okay, it is now time to label our creation. Posterity, we are making a cranberry mead. We started it on this date, and our starting gravity was 1.080. Okay, now that we've got it started, what next? Well, what's going to happen is going to be more along the lines of this. We're going to let this set somewhere in a relatively dark place, in other words, not by a window with sunlight blasting down on it. And we're going to let it do primary fermentation for a good 5 to 7 days, at which time we're going to take out our straining bag, squeezing out as much of the juice as possible, and doing whatever you do with your organic material, compost, sink, I mean, your choice. But we're done with that. We're then going to rack it or transfer it from our primary fermenter into our secondary fermenter. And of course, as I pointed out earlier, this particular fermenter does have a built-in airlock, which you're going to need on both fermenters. We're going to let it sit in that secondary container for about 6 to 8 weeks, and then we'll probably get around to racking it again into another container and continue that process until the wine becomes clear. Generally, I like to let my wines bulk age during that process for about 12 months before I decide to go ahead and give it a tasting, which you'll see and follow on video 12 months from now. And that is going to be the process. You can see examples of this process in my playlist on my channel page under winemaking operations, where I describe what rackings, primary versus secondary, so on and so forth, bottling, pasteurization. Yeah, there's a series of steps that follow after this. But again, you can find everything you need to see there. So if you like what you see here, please click on the subscribe and notify button and become a member. Help support this channel. Pretty much everything you see that I'm using here, you can find links in my description and comment section of the video. You might want to go ahead and check them out. I am an Amazon affiliate and I am a Brew Demon affiliate, just to give you a heads up. So until the next video, I'll see you then. Okay, it's been 12 months. Actually, it's been 364 days. By the time you see this first airing of this video, portion of the video, I just felt like putting one out on a Sunday. Saturday seemed like a much better time to put out a video, so Saturday it is. Okay, what we have here, Cranberry Mead, born 11/05/2022. ABV came in at 9.98%. It was back sweetened. Actually, it went down. It didn't go completely dry. It went down to 1.004 on the hydrometer before I back sweetened it. When I did back sweeten it, I back sweetened it to a back sweetened it. It was back sweetened up to a hydrometer reading of 1.036. In case anybody really wants to know just how sweet this is. This one, as I recall, I actually had to degas this particular bottle of wine while it was in the carboy. It was still effervescent. If I had the right bottles on hand, I probably would have kept it as is, and at least saved one bottle as a sparkling cranberry mead. I think that would have been quite well. But as we all know, with most of my wines and meads, this one's been pasteurized. Okay, this one did not go clear. This was definitely hazy. I don't know if I can even make that kind of noticeable on the screen. Let me see if I can get it angled up. It opaque, I think might be a good word for it. No, you're really not seeing much of anything on the other side of the bottle. But you know what? That's okay. If I were a type of channel, if I had a type of channel where I was focusing in on having crystal clear wines and meads, then I would be using the appropriate measures for that. But since this is a natural channel, for the most part, we'll take it as is. That being said, let's go ahead and see what it tastes like. Oh, when did I bottle this? It's 2 weeks ago. So that's that. I still have to get me another waiter's corkscrew. I've had this one for years. I mean, this is my go-to corkscrew, even though right now it's my only corkscrew, but still. I got the one in the car, and I've got the one on my leather end. So, yeah, corkscrews are available. I'm going to try with my leather end once, just to see how that's going to work. That being said, let's see what we got. Like that sound? Just checking for any residual effervescence that somehow survived the pasteurization process, and I'm not seeing any bubbles coming to the top, so I guess that's okay. The yeast cells are dead. Again, if you're new to this channel, I can only say that since I don't use sulfites or trying to keep it as chemical free as possible, one way of stabilizing the wines and meads and ciders and a few other things has been the use of pasteurization. It works quite well. For those of you who might be wondering, well, aren't you cooking the wine at that point? I did a video last month on doing a taste test between a bottle of wine that was not pasteurized, one that was pasteurized at 140 degrees for about 30 minutes, and one at 165 for about 15 seconds. And the results were kind of surprising. But check out my videos for that in my playlist. That being said, this is actually the end of the day. It's like 9 p.m. I had a long, difficult day, so you know what? Let's give it a real good tasting. All right. This is one of those wines where you can actually smell the fruit you used. This one you can't smell the cranberries. Oh, yeah, it's only 9.98% ABV, rounded up 10%. So it's not going to have a whole lot of kick to it. So you can actually probably drink this for its enjoyment as opposed to for its effect. That being said, let's see what we got. Unlike my cranberry wine that I made first time around, where I didn't really know how strong cranberries could be. They're almost like raspberries. A little goes a long way. I think I used 2 bags of cranberries this time. The honey kind of mellowed it out a bit. Probably could have used just a little bit less honey when I did the back sweetening, but that's okay. It's a nice sweet wine. Still has a lot of tartness, a little tang to it. I think for acidity, I only used my standard quarter of a lemon as my acid blend substitute. That seems to be working okay. But the cranberries are really kicking through. Cranberries are really kicking through. It really takes hold of your tongue too, with that little twangness. If I had to make any adjustments to this particular mead, I used, having reviewed the original video, I used just your standard clover honey, raw honey, your basic generic, although I generally don't name drop brand names. It came from Walmart. I mean, I'm not going to be too sorry about it. But probably if I were to do this one again, and I don't see why not, I would probably use an orange blossom honey. I think that would really help out quite a bit. Or used a bit of orange juice and probably zest during the initial part of fermentation. That would have worked as well. Yeah, adjustments. 1.5 bags of cranberries. I think we'll have done this one do justice. The tartness of the cranberries, again, really comes through. So if you're eating foods that, say, for instance, you would normally use, how can I say this? You would use a wine that you would use basically just to cut through the high degree of fat or whatever. This one will do it. This one will clean and clear your palate quite well. Yeah. It's not a wine that you can just down all in one big gulp. This is something you're more or less going to sip. I think because of the degree of tartness of the cranberries. This is November 2nd. I think I'm really having one of these when I cook up my Thanksgiving dinner. This will be on the table. I'm trying to think just how much inebriation I want to have on that particular day. Well, this one will at least be on the table. Yep. When I pushed this video out, I think in the description section of the video, when I have the list of ingredients, there will be a modification indicating 1.5 bags of cranberries instead of the 2 bags that I used. Yeah, that will probably be the only change that I'll make to this recipe. For those who are wondering, when I started using a homemade yeast nutrient out of bread yeast, whether or not you can really detect the taste of the bread yeast at the point of bottling, nope, sure can't. At least not in this, but then again, those cranberries are pretty much masking anything that might be an underlying flavor, such as bread yeast. But so far, I really haven't noticed any effect of using the homemade yeast nutrient, which has now become a standard thing for all of my wines and meads. It's optional because it's really still the vast majority of my original videos, I wasn't using a yeast nutrient at all. But it doesn't seem to hurt, or looks like it does seem to help. So I'll just keep it in and keep using it for the most part. You know, this would really stand up to ice. Drop an ice cube or two in there, and I think that would pretty much work well with this. It's not something that it's not going to water it down, such as you would think. I think it would work well, which is what I'll do when I get pour my next glass of this later on. It's too late for that. When I finish up the rest of this bottle, probably sometime tomorrow. But at the risk of not running this segment of the video on for way too long here than necessary, I'll just simply say Cranberry Mead with a few adjustments, which is what the whole thing of winemaking as a hobby really comes down to. Trying something for the first time, making adjustments, making it better. That being said, Cranberry Mead. Yeah, Cranberry Mead. Few adjustments, and this will be just right. So there we go. If you like what you see here, please click on that like and subscribe button. Become a member, become a Patreon, help support this channel out. And I'll see you in the next video.